Hey guys, it's Miss Murphy. So I've been thinking of how we can still continue to read and learn social studies and reading even though we're not all in school together. So I decided that I'm actually going to do a novel study with you guys through YouTube and Schoology. Hidden Figures. We were going to start this while we were doing the Civil War, but we didn't really get the opportunity to do that. So what I'm going to try to do is upload one chapter of the book every day or every other day, and I'm gonna post a question, kind of like our journal questions that we've done before, and have you guys respond to them to me through the comments on Schoology. So a little background information on Hidden Figures. I know a lot of you have probably heard of this book. This is about 4 African American women who really changed the pathway for African Americans. One of them was Katherine Johnson, who recently passed away, and she actually was born in West Virginia, and she graduated from WVU. So first off, I'm going to read some background information of the story. Growing up in Hampton, Virginia, I assumed the face of science was brown like mine. My dad worked at the Langley Research Center at NASA. He started there as an engineer intern in 1964 and retired as an internationally respected climate scientist in 2004. Our next-door neighbor taught physics. Our church pews were crowded with mathematicians. I knew so many African Americans working in science, math, and engineering that I thought that's just what black folks did. My father, who as a high school student had wanted to study electrical engineering, lived a different story. Become a physical education teacher, my grandfather told him. He thought my dad would have trouble finding work as an engineer. In 1960s, most college-educated African Americans took teaching jobs or worked in the postal service. As late as 1970, just 1% of all African engineers were black, and my father was one of them. Because of my father's job, I was part of the NASA family. I grew up saving my allowance to buy tickets to ride ponies at the annual NASA Carnival and sharing my Christmas list with Santa at the NASA holiday party. On Thursday nights, I sat with my family and cheered for the Stars, my dad's favorite NBA team. My Sunday school teacher worked at NASA as a computer, doing the complex math for the aerospace engineers. She wasn't alone. From the 1940s to the 1970s, hundreds of women, many of whom were black, worked as mathematicians at NASA. It wasn't until I was older that I appreciated just how extraordinary the occupation was for black women in the South during the days of segregation. The first 5 women were hired at Langley as computers in 1935, and they were white. 10 years later, there were more than 400 women working as mathematicians, and many of them were black. The contributions made by these African American women have not been shared like they deserve. These women should be celebrated, not just because they are black or because they are women, but because they are an important part of American history. This is their story. So I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 1 to you guys today, and this is setting the scene. Dorothy Vaughan Hahn, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darton loved math. As children, they showed specific skills in arithmetic, and they went on to study to be mathematicians and study mathematics in college. After graduation, they worked as teachers before going on to work as computers or mathematicians for the government's air and space program. Over the years, hundreds of women worked as mathematicians for the federal agency called NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which researched and promoted the study of flight. But these women were among many who distinguished themselves with their talents and hard work. Dorothy was a pioneer. She joined the NACA in 1943, the first year the agency began hiring African American women as computers, and she was the first to be promoted into a management position. She was a role model for other women, and she helped to steer the careers of many talented women who were joining the NACA. Mary Jackson was the first African American woman to move up the ranks and become an engineer at the NACA. She was a fighter, standing up for herself and other women who deserved the chance to prove themselves. Her work helped to make supersonic aircraft supersonic aircrafts fly higher and faster. Katherine Johnson, this is the one that is from West Virginia, was an African-American woman who became an essential member of the team that put the first American in orbit around Earth. She was a dreamer and an independent thinker who was unafraid to imagine what others considered to be impossible. She helped to do math that was required to send the first men into space and to bring them back home safely. Christine Darton was an African-American woman who became one of the world's leading experts on the supersonic flight. She became the face of the next generation of female space scientists. Her groundbreaking research on predicting sonic booms is still used today. The accomplishments of these 4 women were remarkable, but their work was even more impressive because it was achieved while living and working in the South during a time when racial discrimination was commonplace and when most women with an interest in math were expected to become math teachers. A different time. In the 1800s, after the Civil War, the government passed laws that ended slavery and granted full citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. Later, however, many state and local governments passed other laws that legalized racial segregation. These regulations, which were most common in the South, kept black people and white people apart in many situations. They could not eat in the same restaurants. They could not drink from the same water fountains. They could not use the same restrooms. They could not attend the same schools. They could not ride in the same parts of the bus. They could not live in the same neighborhoods. They did not receive care at the same hospitals. They could not visit the same beaches. They could not compete on the same sports teams. They could not sit in the same section in movie theaters. They could not marry someone of a different race. They cannot even be buried in the same cemeteries. Technically, African Americans had the right to vote. However, many local laws made it impossible for them to do so. Some communities levied or charged or polled taxes or enforced literacy requirements or imposed other restrictions that made it impossible or difficult for black people to register to vote. And when they're saying literacy requirements, they're meaning they give them a test, like a reading test that I would give you, and they would have to pass that in order to vote. And since people who were not registered to vote weren't allowed to serve on juries or run for political offices, many African Americans were deprived of these civil rights as well. During the 1930s, the United States experienced the Great Depression, a decade-long period of economic struggles. Jobs became difficult to find and wages decreased dramatically. All Americans suffered, but African Americans faced the most serious challenges to find work. For many African Americans, World War II was an opportunity to take a better life for themselves and their families. Black men enlisted in the military in large numbers. Even though they served in separate black communities, usually overseen by white officers, they believed that their loyalty and patriotism would help blacks to earn the rights that white citizens had. Women also enlisted in the Army, where they were called WACs, Women Army Corps, and they served in all female units in the Navy too. And for women like Dorothy, Mary, Catherine, and Christine, World War II opened the door to a career as a professional mathematician. Each of them found their way to the Langley Laboratory where they met one another. And women like them, smart, brave, confident, and good at math. The war was changing the world, and it could change their lives too. So the first question that I would like you guys to respond to, and I'll post this on Schoology as well when I post the video, do you think segregation was fair at this time, or do you think it was unfair? I want you to tell me why. Maybe write me a couple sentences in the responses. I look forward to reading the next chapter with you.